Caleb Kirby felt the weight of every dream he ever carried as he climbed the courthouse steps that morning. The sun was barely up, yet the heat pressed against the cracked earth like the whole world was holding its breath. For 8 long years he had drifted from ranch to ranch, working sunup to sundown, saving every dollar he could. Today was supposed to be his chance, but he also knew chances in Cherry County rarely came without a price. Inside the courthouse meeting room, rich ranchers filled the rows of folding chairs. Men with deep pockets and shiny boots who bought land the way other folks bought bread. Caleb took a seat in the back, holding tight to the envelope that carried everything he owned. $18,000. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. The auctioneer, Raymond Fisher, opened the sale with booming confidence. Prime ranch land went first. Grass so good it looked painted on. Water sources perfect for cattle. Caleb watched bids shoot past $200,000 before the dust even settled. Those properties weren't just out of reach, they were in another world. Lot after lot sold, each one slipping through his fingers like water. Then Fisher cleared his throat and announced Lot 22. Caleb straightened in his chair. This was the one he had studied. This was the one nobody wanted. 480 acres southeast of Ainsworth, Fisher said. Seasonal floods. Marshland half the year. Previous owner couldn't make it run cattle. We'll start at $15,000. The room burst into quiet laughter. No one lifted a hand. Men whispered to each other about useless swampland and soggy ground that could swallow a cow whole. Fisher lowered the bid to $12,000. Sounding almost embarrassed. Before Caleb even realized what he was doing, his hand went up. Silence fell. No one else moved. No one challenged him. Sold for $12,000, Fisher said, shaking his head like he'd just watched someone buy a broken wagon. As Caleb signed the deed, he heard the murmurs behind him. Poor kid. Doesn't know what he bought. That land's cursed with water. Can't run cattle. Can't build, can't do anything. But Caleb ignored them. Something about that land spoke to him, maybe because everyone else hated it. That same afternoon, he drove out to see it. The dry season had pulled most of the water back into deep pockets, leaving behind a strange, quiet beauty. Rich black mud stretched toward the horizon. Cottonwood groves marked hidden springs. The ground shone in places where shallow pools still reflected the wide Nebraska sky. It was wild, untamed, nothing like the ranch land he'd grown up on. As the sun dropped low, Caleb started setting up his tent. He heard movement, light, quick, almost musical. Not cattle, not deer, something else. When he looked across the marsh, the breath left his chest. Horses. Wild ones. They moved like shadows across the water's edge, long legs stepping sure and steady through mud that would trap most animals. Their coats glowed red and gold in the fading light. 15 of them, maybe more, gliding through the wetlands like they owned every inch of it. Caleb stood frozen, watching. These weren't escapees or strays. They belonged here. They were born to this land, shaped by it. For the next 3 days he stayed on the property, learning the rhythm of the wetlands. He saw herons rise like ghosts from the reeds, watched deer bend to drink from spring-fed pools, and every dawn and dusk the horses appeared, moving in patterns that told him they'd been here far longer than anyone guessed. On the 4th morning, a rider approached, a weathered man with sharp eyes and a lifetime of cattle behind him. "You're the fellow bought the wetlands," the man said. "Name's Charles Reed. I run cattle north of here." They shared coffee in the cool morning air. Reed asked if Caleb planned to drain the land. "No," Caleb said. "I think the water might be the best part of it." Reed studied him for a long moment. Most folks don't see it that way. They either hate that land or fear it. "You see the horses?" "I did," Caleb replied. "There's something special." Reed nodded. "Been here longer than I can remember. Story says they're descended from a herd that escaped almost 100 years ago and learned to live where nothing else could. Smart beasts, too smart for ropes or corrals." Before he rode off, Reed left Caleb with a warning. Bigger ranchers have been eyeing your springs for years. Drought's been hitting everyone hard. They won't like you owning what they think they need. Be careful." 2 days later, the warning proved true. Warren Williams, owner of the biggest cattle operation in the county, showed up with a lawyer at his side. They found Caleb stacking feed at his part-time job. Williams didn't waste time. "You're sitting on water that should go to ranchers who need it," he said. "Drain that swamp and sell us access. You'll make money. We'll save cattle. Everybody wins." "And if I don't?" Caleb asked. Williams's lawyer smiled in a way that wasn't friendly. "Then we'll make the law work in our favor." That night, Caleb lay awake, thinking of the horses moving free through the dark marsh. The land he bought for pennies wasn't just swamp. It was alive. It was rare. And now powerful men wanted to tear it apart. He didn't know it yet, but buying that land had already started a war. Caleb knew the fight ahead wouldn't be fair. He was one man with a small truck, a small savings, and a piece of land everyone else believed was worthless. His neighbors were giants with deep pockets, old influence, and lawyers who twisted the law like wire. But he also knew something they didn't. His land wasn't broken. It was special. The first thing he did after Williams's threat was call Beatrice, the county clerk. She had a way of finding things others overlooked. When he asked for everything the courthouse had on his property, she didn't hesitate. "Come by in the morning," she said. "I'll dig through the archives." When Caleb walked in the next day, she had a stack of folders waiting. "This land has a story," she told him softly. "People just forgot to listen." She showed him old maps, handwritten records, and finally, a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1926. The photograph stopped him cold. Horses, standing knee-deep in marsh, strong-bodied and bright-eyed. Not wild Mustangs. Something different. "Joseph Novak," Beatrice said, "a Czech immigrant. He bought that land because of the wetlands, not in spite of them. He believed horses could be bred for marsh work, brought stock from Italy, Maramano horses, built a breeding program. When he died, the program collapsed. The horses escaped, and they survived." Caleb stared at the picture. That meant the herd he'd been watching wasn't random at all. They were descendants of a vanished idea. Horses shaped for mud, water, balance, built to thrive where others sank. Suddenly, his land felt like a living museum, a rare piece of history still breathing. He left the courthouse with a new sense of purpose. If Williams and the other ranchers thought they were fighting over useless swampland, they didn't understand the value hiding in plain sight. For the next month, Caleb worked nonstop. He applied for conservation grants, contacted biologists, reached out to universities. He learned everything he could about wetlands, water rights, and habitat protection. And the more he learned, the clearer it became. If he didn't take a stand now, the wetlands and the horses wouldn't survive. Just when he started gaining hope, 3 ranchers, Williams, Daniels, and Garrison, showed up together at his door. They brought a lawyer and a hydrologist carrying charts and maps like weapons. "We're here to make a real offer," Daniels said. $100,000 to drain the wetlands. You keep the land, we get the water. Everyone wins." Caleb shook his head. "Wildlife lives here. Horses, birds. Plants you won't find anywhere else." Garrison rolled his eyes. "It's swamp grass and feral animals. Nothing that matters." "And if I say no?" Caleb asked. The lawyer stepped forward. "Then we take this to court. Water belongs to the state. If they decide your wetlands are wasting it, you'll lose control anyway." They left Caleb standing alone in his doorway, holding his ground but feeling how small that ground really was. 2 weeks later, he sent all 3 ranchers a certified letter declining their offer. And that's when the real war began. Newspaper stories painted him as a troublemaker. Letters claimed he was letting animals run wild and harm cattle. Trucks drove slow by his property at night, watching, waiting. The pressure grew so heavy it felt like the land itself was holding its breath. Then someone cut his fences. The wild horses wandered across the boundary and into Williams's land. Williams called animal control within minutes. "They're damaging my property!" he shouted. "They're dangerous!" It was the opening he'd been waiting for. Caleb rushed to the wetlands, tracking the herd for hours through reeds, water trails, and soft mud. He found them gathered around a hidden spring, calm and grazing. They weren't causing trouble. They weren't hurting anything. He repaired the fence and waited. By sunset, the horses returned home on their own, slipping quietly through the marsh the way they had done for generations. But the damage was done. Williams now had, quote, 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 and he took it to the county commissioners. At the public hearing, Williams didn't hold back. "Those horses are a menace," he shouted. "They threaten cattle, waste water, and serve no purpose. Drain the swamp before we lose more livestock." Quote. Garrison backed him. "We're dying out there. Our ponds are dry." Meanwhile, this boy sits on water he can't use. Caleb walked to the front carrying a folder full of documentation, genetic studies, wildlife reports, grant letters, and an economic analysis stronger than anyone expected. "These wetlands aren't waste," he said. "They filter water, store it, protect the land, and the horses, they're unique. They carry genes not found anywhere else." He told them about the Maramano breeding program, about their adaptations, about the universities offering research funding, about ecotourism that could bring long-term income to the county. But the ranchers weren't ready to lose. Rumors spread that Caleb wanted to bring federal control to Cherry County. People whispered that he was an outsider, even though he'd grown up there. Some claimed he wanted to shut down ranching for good. Caleb had never felt so alone. Then, something unexpected happened. Charles Reed knocked on his door. "We need to talk," Reed said, "and you need to know the truth." Quote. He told Caleb everything. The ranchers were drowning in debt. They weren't desperate for water. They were desperate for money and avoiding shrinking their herds. His wetlands were an easy target. Reed wasn't alone. Other ranchers quietly stepped forward, tired of the bullying, tired of the lies. They believed in Caleb's plan. They believed the wetlands had a place in Cherry County's future. With their support, Caleb prepared for the final hearing. On the day of the vote, both sides came armed for battle: lawyers, scientists, ranchers, reporters. 6 hours of testimony, arguments fierce enough to shake windows. But the moment that changed everything came from the last person anyone expected: Beatrice, holding a thick folder. The original owner registered this land in 1920 as an experimental agricultural station, she said. Legally, that designation still stands. Under Nebraska law, the county has no right to interfere with research use. The room froze. Williams turned pale. The commissioners reviewed the documents. Then Commissioner Hayes spoke. "Mr. Kirby's operations are protected. This dispute is closed." Caleb had won, but he knew this was only the beginning. Now the world would learn what lived inside those wetlands. 3 years passed, and the land everyone once mocked as useless swamp had become something no one in Cherry County could ignore. The wetlands that ranchers had wanted drained were now alive with visitors, researchers, and students walking the wooden paths Caleb built with his own hands. What was once called worthless land had turned into a miracle of life that people traveled miles to see. On a cool spring morning, Caleb stood beside a group of university students taking samples from the marsh. The rising sun lit the water in gold streaks, and the wild horses moved in single file along the far bank, their hooves barely making a sound on the soft earth. To the students, this was research. To Caleb, it was proof that he had been right to fight. The wild horses had become the heart of the station. Their genetic uniqueness attracted scientists from across the country. Dr. Angela Francis, the equine geneticist who first tested the herd, now ran a long-term study on the land. She always said the same thing whenever visitors asked why the horses mattered so much. These animals adapted to a landscape most people believed could never support anything valuable. They remind us that nature knows what it's doing. The research station employed 12 full-time workers, Bird watchers booked rooms months in advance. Wildlife photographers waited hours to capture the moment a heron lifted off a pond or a foal stepped into water for the first time. Even school buses from nearby towns made regular trips, kids pointing excitedly at the horses they'd never seen anywhere else. And slowly, the county changed too. Hotels filled. Restaurants grew busy. The little town of Ainsworth, long struggling to keep up, began opening new shops and services as tourism money flowed in. Caleb's wetlands, once considered a burden, had become a blessing that reached far beyond his fence line. Some of the ranchers who had once stood against him came around when they saw the benefits. Stuart Garrison partnered with Caleb to offer bird-watching horseback tours across both their lands. Riders moved through prairie and marsh, learning about the wildlife and the horses. It brought in steady money during slow seasons, and Stuart admitted something he never expected to say. There's more profit in showing the land than forcing it to change. Charles Reed became even more important. He joined the research board, shared ranching knowledge with biologists, and often told newcomers the story of how a young man saved land everyone else believed was beyond saving. But not everyone softened. Warren Williams never forgave Caleb for winning the fight. He kept to himself, muttering to anyone who'd listen that the wetlands were still a mistake. But as drought cycles shifted and water levels returned to normal, his warnings lost power. The cattle industry recovered, and the fear that once drove ranchers to attack Caleb faded into memory. Williams remained angry, but the world moved on without him. As for the horses, they thrived. Their numbers climbed to almost 30, yet the marsh supported them easily. Foals were born strong. Older horses moved with the same calm grace Caleb had first seen years earlier. The herd became part of the land's identity, living proof that some things grow stronger when they're left free. One evening, long after the visitors had left, Caleb walked alone through the tall marsh grass. The sky burned orange and purple as the sun dropped behind the hills. The horses grazed in the shallow water, their reflections rippling gently in the surface. He stopped when one of the mares stepped toward him. She wasn't tame, not truly, but she trusted him. That was enough. Her wide hooves rested easily in the mud, perfectly shaped for the soft ground. Her ears flicked toward him, calm and curious. In that moment, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. He closed his eyes and heard his grandfather's voice. Good land takes care of itself. Bad land needs fighting. The trick is knowing which is which. Caleb opened his eyes. The wetlands had taken care of themselves for generations. All he had done was listen. All he had done was protect what was already perfect. 3 years earlier, he'd been a hired hand with a childhood dream and a pocket full of hard-earned dollars. Everyone laughed when he bought swampland. Everyone said he was throwing his life away. But he hadn't bought swampland. He had bought a future no one else was brave enough to imagine. The Nebraska Cattlemen's Association eventually honored him with an award for innovative agriculture. Standing on the stage, Caleb looked out at a crowd of ranchers, scientists, and townspeople who once doubted him. The words in the citation echoed in his mind. For proving that protecting the land can bring prosperity and that conservation is not the enemy of ranching but its partner. As applause filled the hall, Caleb thought of the first night he camped by the wetlands, of the heron lifting from the water, of the horses gliding through the marsh, of the warning Charles Reed gave him, of the threats Williams made, of every moment he almost gave up. But he didn't. The $12,000 gamble that everyone mocked had turned into a legacy of land preserved, a legacy of wild horses protected, a legacy of one man who refused to drain what nature built. And every spring, when snowmelt fills the ponds and life wakes beneath the warm sun, the horses still run free across the marsh. They splash through water that has shaped them for generations. They lift their heads to the wind. They move like living echoes of the past. And in those moments, Caleb knows he didn't just save them, they saved him too.